Russia to death, will it ever fructify? So therefore, to bring in an end to this conflict, I think Donald Trump's proposal holds a lot of good, and it has got a lot of substance and meaning. And in foreseeable future, we should be expecting something meaningful and constructive taking place to minimize the geopolitical churn in the world order.
Indeed, and Trump has been, specifying that the loss of lives and preventing the loss of lives on the front lines is his very first priority. Major General Sudhakarji, I'd like to thank you for once again taking out time, sharing your analysis with our viewers. It's always a pleasure to learn from you as well. On that note, viewers, we're shifting focus away from the war that's taking place in Europe towards what's happening in the United States of America. We're now learning that the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is planning to move all remaining enforcement cases and litigation to the Department of Justice due to severe funding shortfalls. The CFPB warned that it expects to exhaust its funds after the 31st of December, raising the possibility of immediate furloughs or unpaid staff as well. This move marks a major step in the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the agency despite a court order prohibiting its shutdown. Now, since its creation after the 2008 financial crisis, the CFPB has returned over $21 billion to consumers but has faced years of legal and political attacks. Democrats have warned that transferring cases to the Justice Department could leave consumers more vulnerable, especially to fraud, scams, and unfair financial practices. The latest that we are tracking on the broadcast as far as this particular case is concerned, the Trump administration is attempting to effectively dismantle the U.S. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that was established in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis that wreaked havoc across the globe. And this transfer of CFPB enforcement cases to the Department of Justice under the Trump administration is being touted to increase the speed, the prioritization, the outcomes of the litigation as well, because up until now, the CFPB has witnessed funding shortfalls and has in fact warned that after the December 31st this year, the possibility of immediate furloughs or unpaid staff could increase as well. Therefore, this move, of course, marks a major step in the Trump administration's efforts to dismantle the agency, despite a court order prohibiting its shutdown. This particular agency has faced years of legal and political attacks, but it has, despite all of that, managed to return over $21 billion to consumers. Democrats, meanwhile, are warning that transferring cases to the Justice Department could leave consumers more vulnerable to fraud and scams and being taken advantage of. But this is, of course, the latest that is coming in. An appeals court earlier, back in August, had in fact cleared the way for the restructuring at CFPB. It was a 2-1 decision in which Trump appointees had ruled that the sweeping drive to close the agency could not be reviewed by the courts. It was prohibited, but it did clear the way for the Trump administration to largely dismantle the work. It had lifted a lower court's injunction that had preserved the agency's structure. It, of course, barred mass layoffs for months as well. But of course, now the Trump administration is ordering the Consumer Protection Agency to stop work, closing the building as well. Remember, this entire agency, the CFPB, was effectively created to protect consumers after the 2008 financial crisis and subprime mortgage lending scandal. In fact, Russell Watt, the newly installed director, of the Office of Management and Budget, directed the CFPB to stop work on proposed rules, to suspend the effective dates on any rules that were finalized but not yet effective, and to stop investigative work and not begin any new investigations. The agency, as I mentioned earlier, has been a target of several political attacks ever since the Obama administration had pushed to include it in the 2010 financial reform legislation that followed the 2007-8 financial crisis. In fact, officials have also stated that the CFPB's headquarters in Washington, D.C. are likely to be closed down as well. With us on the broadcast is Ms. Alison Mutler, former Associated Press Bureau Chief, joining us from Romania. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We're, of course, tracking what the Trump administration is planning to do with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is planning to remove all remaining cases and transfer it to the Justice Department. The Democrats are arguing that such a move could lead to the dismantling of the organization itself, which would then leave consumers more vulnerable to cases such as fraud and scams and being taken advantage of in financial means as well. I wanted to understand from you, apart from this, what other implications are there? There is a court ruling that does prohibit this from taking place.
Well, I mean, generally, it's a story about the Trump administration trying to stop any independent organizations, think tanks, NGOs, et cetera, and bring everything under his administration, the Justice Department. He doesn't want any organization which is independent of the administration causing him problems. He's seeking to exert control over it. So that's the basic story, what it's about.
Indeed. And could we then expect some sort of a legal battle to play out as well? Because up until now, we've seen courts rule that his administration must not dismantle the organization. The courts did, in fact, provide a pathway towards the restructuring of the CFPB, but not outrightly dismantling it.
Yes, I think we can expect legal battles as we've seen with other cases that Trump has pushed for. It's a battle between the justice system and the courts, rule of law, and Trump. So I think we can expect this to be protracted. He's been very clear that he will use all legal means possible, and he's trying to get this organization under his control. That is part of his policy, and yes, we can expect ongoing court battles. What the final outcome will be is unclear for the moment, but there is an attempt to weakening democracy in the United States.
All right, ma'am, requesting you to stay on with us as we're shifting our focus away from the United States of America towards Belgium. We're now learning that Belgium is set for 3 days of strikes, with unions protesting government austerity measures, including spending cuts and labor law reforms. The strike will unfold in 3 waves, starting with transportation disruptions, a public sector strike, and a full general strike on the Wednesday. SNCB trains will operate at reduced capacity, and several Eurostar services have been cancelled as well. Schools, hospitals and other public services will join the strike on Tuesday, that is tomorrow, with no flights expected at Brussels, Zaventem and Charleroi airports on Wednesday as well. The protests target Prime Minister Bart De Wever's proposed budget cuts aimed at reducing Belgium's high national debt. Unions argue that the measures threaten social programs, while De Wever's government seeks agreement on reforms by Christmas. Still with us on the broadcast is Ms. Alison Mutler. I wanted to understand from you, on one hand, Belgium's government is facing mounting debt and pressure due to that. On the other, the unions are arguing for the fact that the spending should not be cut down and reform should not take place as far as labor laws are concerned. Do you think the De Wever government will try to strike a balance between the two, or will it go ahead with its current plan?
I imagine today there'll be lots of negotiations between the union and the government. The government will be seeking to alleviate the pain of all this closure, which is going to cost the country a lot socially, economically, politically, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there'll be a lot of negotiations going on behind the scenes, and whether a compromise can be made between union leaders and the government is unsure. But obviously this is going to hit Belgium, and not just Belgium, is, you know, it's a very important capital. You have the European Union there, other international organizations. So it's not just the Belgian people who are being affected, but also internationally it'll be very badly affected. Mm-hmm. So I would imagine there'll be negotiations going on, because the strikes are very serious. I mean, if it's transportation and hospitals and schools, it was like a shutdown for the country. So I think the government will be trying to you know, negotiate with the union so that they can they come to some settlement. It's unclear how tough the unions are in Belgium, whether they will press with maximalist demands or whether they'll be able to reach a compromise. Generally, unions in the end do reach a compromise, but they have a couple of key demands. So I think that's what will be happening, because it'll be costing the country millions, probably billions of euros.
Absolutely. You've spoken about the international implications as well, even as the government is trying to balance its debt reduction along with its social programs. But if, hypothetically speaking, an agreement is not reached by Christmas, how might this affect investor confidence in Belgium?
Well, of course it is. I mean, already in Belgium, we have a 5-party coalition.
Yes.
And coalition governments are very difficult because it requires agreement on all parties, and they're from different political wings. So that is already much more difficult to start with. But I think it will be negotiations, what the government could roll back on, what the unions are insisting on. But there's obviously designed to be increased pressure. And this is 3 days of strike, and then there's demands for Christmas. So I can think we'll expect a crisis, an ongoing crisis, which will definitely affect investor confidence. So, and that is bad for the government, which needs as much money as it can get at the moment.
Absolutely. Ms. Mutler, with that, I'd like to thank you for taking our time, of course, putting what's taking place in the United States and in Belgium into perspective. On that note, viewers, we're shifting focus to Slovenia. We're now learning that Slovenians have voted against a law that would have legalized assisted dying for terminally ill adults. According to unofficial results released by the State Election Commission, the partial count shows 53.43% opposed and 46.57% in favour. The law, passed by Parliament in July, was sent to a binding referendum after a citizens' initiative led by right-wing politician Alice Primk. Primk celebrated the results, stating it demonstrates that the culture of life has defeated the cult of death. Supporters of the bill had argued that it would provide relief to adults facing unbearable suffering with no chance of recovery. Take a look.
Zato, ker sem jaz bolana, 4. stadij raka in ne bi rada trpela. Dala sem pa že skozi očeta pa mamo, oče raka, mama demenco, tako da vem, kako je to.
Pravico do končanja življenja ja, ampak tukaj ne glasujemo samo za pravico, ampak glasujemo za tale zakon, ki bi pa po mnenju mnogih moral biti dosti boljši.
Shifting focus away from Slovenia towards Lithuania, we're now learning that Lithuania's Vilnius airport temporarily halted its operations yesterday as it reportedly found weather balloons moving towards its airspace. This caused the airport to divert some of its incoming flights to other cities. This comes as repeated drone sightings and incursions have troubled European aviation in the recent months. Such incidents have been reported at airports in Copenhagen and Brussels, with the Vilnius airport closure becoming the 9th shutdown in Lithuania's capital since early October. According to Lithuanian authorities, the recent airspace disruptions were due to weather balloons.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the NewsX Eurozone. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. The Kremlin said it would wait for official details on the US-Ukraine updated peace framework, with spokesperson Dmitry Peskov noting Moscow has yet to receive a formal information despite media reports from Geneva. This comes after Vladimir Putin said the original 28-point US plan could be a basis for ending the war. The US and Ukraine have said that they have drafted a refined peace framework in Geneva to revise an earlier plan criticized as too favorable to Russia, with both sides committing to intensive work before a Thursday deadline. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has urged German Chancellor Friedrich Merz to adopt a rational and pragmatic China policy, calling on Berlin to prioritize shared interests during their meeting at the G20 summit in Johannesburg. The talks signal a move to repair strained ties after German foreign minister postponed his China visit due to lack of high-level meetings. Senior BBC figures Michael Prescott, Samir Shah, Sir Robbie Gibb and Caroline Thompson will face MP questions today. This comes after a leaked Prescott memo led to the resignations of the Director General and Head of News. Prescott will speak publicly for the first time about his concerns over BBC reporting, including Panorama's edit of Trump's speech. French President Emmanuel Macron has met with his counterpart Brice Oligui Nguema from Gabon. In Libreville, the two leaders reaffirmed their commitment to a reinvented partnership following bilateral talks. The Israeli army has released a video claiming to show the strike that killed Hezbollah's top military in the southern suburb of Beirut, despite a U.S.-brokered truce a year ago. The strike, the first on the outskirts of the Lebanese capital in months, targeted Iran-backed Hezbollah's acting chief of staff, Ali Tabtabai, the military said in a statement. Indonesia has introduced the Global Citizenship of Indonesia (GCI) permit, allowing former Indonesian citizens to live and work in the country indefinitely as a substitute for dual citizenship, which remains illegal under national law. The policy is modeled after India's OCI program, applies to adults who must otherwise choose a single nationality at the age of 18. More than 11,000 people in 7 Malaysian states have been affected by flooding caused by torrential rain. A report from the National Disaster Management Agency showed 11,009 people from 3,839 families who have been affected by the flooding as of 6 a.m. local time. Now we start with Russia and Ukraine. The Kremlin has said that it considers it to be inappropriate to discuss elements of European counter-proposals on Ukraine, including wording related to NATO. Through the media, Kremlin officials stressed that negotiations should remain confidential. Moscow also stated that there are currently no plans for a meeting this week between Russian and U.S. delegations, and noted that it has not received any official information from the Geneva talks on potential Ukraine peace efforts. Separately, the Kremlin has confirmed that a telephone call is scheduled between President Vladimir Putin and the President of Turkey today. Now for this discussion, we welcome Alexei Haran. He's a professor of comparative politics, joins us live from Kyiv. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. Welcome to NewsX World. Now,
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, looking at this, what do you think? What lies? What are the challenges and what are the common grounds for U.S., Russia, and Kyiv to agree on this peace plan?
Look, at this point, there's no common ground between Russia and Ukraine because the so-called 28-point peace plan, which we saw in media, it wasn't confirmed official, that was based on Russian document. This was recognized by Secretary Rubio, who initially wasn't involved in that issue. So we know that there was another document prepared by American side, which was discussed in Kyiv, and now it was discussed in Switzerland, and now it takes into what we have out of these negotiations is we have the document which is agreed framework. It's not the final deal, but framework, which includes Ukrainian and European suggestions, because basically you cannot talk about Ukraine without Ukraine, and you cannot decide for Europe without Europe, because there were some points regarding Europe which were not discussed with Europe. Okay, so at this point we have a plan which seemed to be adopted by American and Ukrainian side and partially by Europeans. How Russia would react to that, this is another question, because definitely it's different from what was published in the in press. Some points, yeah, they are confirmed, but others are changed, which reflects Ukrainian position. Because, you know, Russia is aggressor, Ukraine is a victim on aggressor. Ukraine cannot give up its land. You in India are in the same situation. Part of your territory is occupied by other states. Do you agree to give it up? The answer is no. Very well. So why should we give up Ukrainian territory to Russia? And Russia is aggressor. Why should we diminish Ukrainian army as Russia demands? Again, Russia is attacking Ukraine, not Ukraine is attacking Russia. So why should we diminish our army, which is fighting about aggressor? So all these things, they were changed in the edited document which would appear after negotiations in Switzerland. Again, for me, basically, Russia doesn't want any peace at this point. They would like to continue. So we'll see what will be the Russian reaction to that. I think Russia would reveal what it really wants. It wants either capitulation of Ukraine or continuation of aggression. So we'll see.
And Professor, what do you think, what is US's role as a mediator and Turkey's role in facilitating communication between Russia and Western nations?
Turkey's role?
Yes.
Okay, well, Turkey was very instrumental in exchange of prisoners. Yes, that's right. Turkey confirms the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which is very important. Turkey recognizes Crimea as the legal territory of Ukraine. I'm not sure that they were involved in other issues that were discussed in Switzerland, frankly speaking. I don't know this information. I don't think that Turkey now has tools to influence direct negotiations with the United States and preparation of this document. Yes, Turkey, they have relations both with Russia and Ukraine. They are trying to play the role of mediator and intermediary. They would like to. So we know that Istanbul is a place where there are negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, but for the time being, you know, these negotiations were stopped.
Yes.
They reached nothing besides, with exception of exchange of prisoners of war.
Yes. With that, I would like to thank Professor Alexei Hara for joining us today from Kyiv and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we stay in the region. Ukrainians have expressed skepticism that peace talks in Geneva between Kyiv and the United States and the European partners would end the war with Russia. Many residents claim that they fear the proposals under discussion could weaken Ukraine after earlier drafts reportedly included ceding territory and limiting military ambitions. Let's listen into what some of the residents have shared.
По-перше, це вже якісь новини позитивні на мій рахунок. Слава Богу, що якось світова спільнота відреагувала на ці ганебні 28 пунктів, які були, тому що це була просто капітуляція України.
Особливо план Трампа, це взагалі капітуляція для України. Думаю, що український народ не погодиться. Якщо навіть вони підпишуть, і їх вже треба реалізувати, а буде хто реалізовувати український народ, а він з цим не погоджується.
Я вважаю, що воно повинно до чогось прийти. Так не може все далі продовжатися. На якихось умовах вони повинні це вже зупинити, я не знаю. Але віддавати землю України теж неправильно.
Now we have a breaking news. Moscow's mayor confirmed that they have downed one drone en route to Moscow. As a result, the country's air transport regulator states that Zhukovsky Airport in Moscow introduces temporary restrictions on flights. The Domodedovo and Sheremetyevo airports first imposed similar limits but have now lifted the restrictions. Now we move on to EU. EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic has recently met with U.S. Secretary of State Commerce Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Ambassador Jamieson Greer in their first official visit to Belgium's capital city, Brussels. Briefing on the discussions that he held with them, Sefcovic has stated that the EU and US have reached a proper deal, but more deliberation is still required on its implementation. He's particularly stressed on steel and derivatives, where he raised the issue of reducing tariffs and forming a common understanding on the meetings that needs of global overcapacity. Let's listen into what he has shared.
We also recognize that more work lies ahead, especially on steels and derivatives, where we seek both to reduce tariff and to confront global overcapacity together. And this is a priority area for the EU, as recently demonstrated by the adoption of our steel regulation to help restore balance to the EU steel market. And finally, we discussed the forward-looking agenda, including critical minerals, where we share the goal of securing reliable supplies while strengthening our respective industrial base.
Moreover, the discussions also included other critical raw materials linked with economic security. Commenting on the recent talks, Lithuanian Foreign Minister Kęstutis Budrys has referred to an agreement that was reached earlier in August and further emphasized on the need for its swift implementation. Let's listen in.
We cannot be in the permanent fixing phase. We have to have the normal agreement on steel and aluminium and work on it. We have to implement swiftly what was agreed back in August, and that is what I'm really looking into.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Shyam Batra. He's a British politician and former London mayoral candidate, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mr. Shyam, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, to what extent should the EU and US coordinate their policies on steel tariffs and global overcapacity, and how could such cooperation affect their economic relations with each other?
Are you talking about Europe?
Yes, Europe.
Yes. Well, I mean, you probably heard the news yesterday that one of our billionaires has left the UK because of all of the bad situations, and he's in steel. So I think the European Union situation, they have a severe control on everything on 28 countries. And the way the steel manufacturing, etc., has been dealt with, I think it needs to be kind of overhauled. It's long overdue as well. I mean, this has been going on for quite some time, that we don't know who is in control of this. And not only that, what effect does it give to the UK and other countries in the world?
Right. And what challenges and common grounds do you think US and Europe has to progress on these trade talks?
Well, I mean, the US has extensive programs over there, as you know, and plus the trade tariffs as well, which are going to impact on the steel and industry, because most of the situation that's happened, because Trump has raised all these trade situations, that given rise to a lot of issues that have gone on. But in other words, sorry, I think I had a lag there. What happens to Europe in terms of supplying the trade to the various other countries, and not only that to the rest of the world, remains to be seen. I mean, the prices are what they are according to the systems that are set up. But it is a huge business, very huge business. And I noticed that when Trump did the trade tariffs, he segmented them out of the way because obviously it's big money. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussions going on in the very near future about how and who is going to supply and who is going to send and so forth. There is a lot of, I mean, if you look at Africa as well, the steel industry in Africa is massive. It's very, very big. I mean, it could be a massive exporter one day. We don't know, but it is not part of Europe. It is not part of US. It is not part of UK. It's just Africa in its own sense. So in those realms, I think I do think it needs to be completely overhauled in terms of who is using this, who is going to be the dominant leader in the world. Is it Europe? Is it US? Is it both? We don't know at this moment in time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Shyam Batra, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, looking at BBC, senior figures involved in the BBC's recent troubles will be questioned by the MPs today. Michael Prescott, a former editorial advisor who has raised issues with BBC reporting, including Panorama's editing of the US President Donald Trump's speech, as it will be addressed in the matter publicly for the first time when he appears before the House of Commons committee. Earlier this month, an internal memo was released written by Prescott, which was leaked to the press, leading to the resignations of the BBC's Director General and Head of News. However, BBC Chairman Samir Shah will be giving evidence and also is under pressure for handling of the affair, and fellow board members Sir Robbie Gibb and Caroline Thompson. Now we welcome back Mr. Shyam Batra. He's a British politician and former London mayoral candidate, joins us live from London. Thank you very much, Mr. Shyam, for staying with us. Now, Thank you. Now, looking at this, how should parliamentary oversight be exercised when media organizations become embroiled in controversies and scandals, and where is this line between legitimate scrutiny and political pressure?
Well, I think Trump wants to teach the BBC a lesson, hence he's upped his stake from 1 billion to 5 billion in compensation, but the BBC are not having any of this. As you quite rightly said, Michael Prescott is going to appear against the MPs committees, I think maybe today or later on this afternoon. But there is Caroline Daniel as well, the former editorial advisor, who is going to also speak in front of the Culture and Sports Media Committee today as well. I think BBC has some big problems, and it's been long overcoming anyway, because a lot of people in the UK do not like to subscribe to the BBC. They find it very biased, one-way-sided. And now that the doctrine of this sort of stuff, let's just say for Trump for now, has come out, I did say in your last conversations that how many other media outlets are doing the same thing. We don't know. We don't have a clue. But this is the very first time that something like this has happened, where something has been publicly announced that it's been doctored, and somebody has investigated the Telegraph, for example. I wait to hear today how the speech is going to go at the House of Commons. And I don't know whether Trump is going to pursue the compensation claim against the BBC. If it does, the BBC will close down. Intergovernment alliance as well, suing from the US to the UK is sometimes quite very difficult, and vice versa anyway, because there are two different countries.
Yes.
But the BBC being a world organization as well, having BBC World as well, I'm not quite sure how this video got out, and was it through the BBC World or was it through national BBC? But the BBC have got severe problems with this, and I think there'll be more issues coming out very soon from them, because I think they've been doing a lot of this stuff all the way through, especially for Trump. They didn't want him into power. And one way would have been to show that video worldwide that he did incite a riot, which obviously he clearly didn't. So there are a lot of issues going on with this. I mean, we've got Sir Robbie as well, BBC senior editor and director, who is going to also come under scrutiny. A lot of people have resigned, and Mr. Shah should have dealt with this very, very quickly and promptly like that, but he didn't. He thought it would just brush under the carpet, because media sometimes feel that they are far more stronger than the public, and they can influence a lot of people's opinions and stuff. And it's not right. But the BBC has been operating in this callous way for many, many years. They take a lot of money from our public. And apparently it's compulsory to pay the BBC, but people don't want to pay. I personally don't. I'm not going to be part of it. I don't see their programs. I'm not interested in their stuff. I look at all other media news around the world and find out whether it's factual or not. And then, because I do my own podcast shows, etc., and I want to ensure that the information I give to our people is honest and truthful. And this is the first and foremost thing that any organisation, such as the Broadcasting House or the United Kingdom, which has been going for so many years, should have been really upfront and dealt with this, and not even doctored his video. Why did they need to doctor it? It does not make any sense to me. It just clearly shows that they did not want to see this man in power at that time. And unfortunately, it happened that he couldn't get into power. So I think it's wrong, but this is an alarm bell for all of the media outlets around the world to wake up, because if they have been doctoring this, if the BBC have done this, then I think there are many, many others who have been playing the game as well, especially to political leaders and other sources.
Yes, indeed. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Shyam Batra for sharing that insight from London. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Spain. Spain's chief prosecutor, Alvaro Garcia Ortiz, has resigned after the Supreme Court found him guilty of leaking confidential information in a case involving the partner of a leading opposition figure. The decision delivers a significant blow to Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, who appointed Garcia Ortiz in 2022 and has repeatedly defended him. In a letter to Justice Minister Felix Bolaños, Garcia Ortiz said he was stepping down out of profound respect for the court, even though the sentence banning him from his post for 2 years has not yet formally taken effect. The Supreme Court has not released its full rationale, and Garcia Ortiz may still appeal to Spain's Constitutional Court or the European Court of Human Rights. Government spokesperson Pilar Alegría has said that Madrid respects the decision but disagrees with it, warning that the lack of full ruling and the absence of judicial unanimity set a worrying precedent. Now we move on to Belgium. Belgium's Prime Minister Bart De Wever has said that his five-party coalition has finally reached a budget agreement for next year. After months of fractious negotiations, the deal was struck after marathon talks that ran from Sunday morning into the early hours of Monday, meeting the Christmas deadline De Wever set earlier this month. The package includes tax hikes on share purchases, airline tickets, and natural gas, as well as a newly levy on banks. Combined with spending cuts, the government plans to reduce the deficit by more than 9 billion euros. Through 2029, Belgium's budget gap is expected to hit 4.5% of the GDP this year, with debt above 104%, far exceeding EU targets. Despite the agreement, a 3-day national strike over pension reforms will still go ahead. And that's a wrap on the NewsX Eurozone. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
Gaza's fragile peace is on the brink. Hope emerges amid deepening devastation. Ceasefire falters under ongoing violations. Diplomatic breakthrough faces overwhelming challenges. Gaza's future is uncertain whilst reconstruction is underway.
Hello, you're watching another episode of Explained with me, Asuma Kataoka. Israel's latest strikes in Gaza and even beyond its borders have raised urgent questions about the durability of the ceasefire plan that was supposed to hold more than a year of grinding conflict. Before we break down the events of the past 48 hours, we first need to understand the 20-point ceasefire peace plan that was meant to keep both sides from returning to open fire. Because without that context, the renewed violence, the accusations of truce violations, and the widening regional fallout are impossible to fully grasp. For more than a year, Gaza lays in ruins. People, families displaced, and both sides traumatized. By late 2025, hope seemed lost until a surprising diplomatic push led by the US President Donald Trump offered a glimmer of stability. Now, with Israeli airstrikes continuing despite the ceasefire, and with a major strike in Beirut killing a senior Hezbollah commander, many are asking whether the peace plan ever had a real chance or whether it's already unraveling. Today on Explained, we break down what happened, why it matters, and what it means for the fragile calm the world was told had finally arrived. The proposal, which is a sweeping 20-point peace plan, was controversial from the start. but it rapidly gained momentum and brought Israel and Hamas closer to agreement than anyone predicted. Today we break down how this plan came to be, what it actually says, how it's unfolding on the ground, and what it could mean for the future of Israel, Gaza, and the wider vision. To understand why this plan appeared at this moment, we need to go back to the beginning. On October 7, 2023, Hamas carried out a massive attack on Israel, killing around 1,200 people and taking over 240 hostages. Israel responded with a relentless military campaign in Gaza, months of bombardment that destroyed hospitals, schools, and entire urban centers. What followed was one of the worst humanitarian crises in modern Middle Eastern history. Gaza's infrastructure collapsed, food and water became scarce, roughly 2 million people, almost the entire population, were displaced. By early 2025, both sides were exhausted. Families of hostages protested daily in Tel Aviv demanding action, while Gazan civilians were calling publicly for the war to end. International pressure mounted, especially from Arab states who feared the conflict would spill over to them as well. In September 2025, President Donald Trump unveiled a new proposal, bold, detailed, and unlike previous attempts at peacemaking, many observers dismissed it immediately, believing neither Israel nor Hamas would consider it. But to widespread surprise, both sides engaged. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared with Trump at the White House on 29 September and accepted the plan. On 3 October, Hamas issued a public response. It agreed to return all 48 remaining hostages in Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners and Gaza detainees, and it signaled willingness to hand Gaza's governance to a technocratic Palestinian committee. But it avoided addressing the plan's requirement that it disarms, which is a central element of the proposal. Despite this, negotiators from the United States, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey accelerated their efforts. Trump imposed multiple deadlines, pressure rose on both sides, and civilians in Gaza and Israel amplified their calls for a breakthrough. On 8 October, Secretary of State Marco Rubio handed the president a note during a televised event indicating that an agreement was very close. Hours later, Trump announced that both Israel and Hamas had signed off on the first phase of the peace plan. The agreement was formally signed the next day in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. At the heart of this initiative is a detailed 20-point framework which was published by the White House. It lays out the ceasefire, the hostage exchange, governance reforms, security arrangements, and a long-term vision for Gaza's reconstruction and political future. President Trump's plan begins with a fundamental redefinition of Gaza's future. It states that Gaza must become a de-radicalized terror-free zone that poses no threat to Israel, Egypt, or any neighboring country. This vision is paired with a commitment to redevelop Gaza for the benefit of its population, whose suffering over years of blockade and war has been immense from the outset. The plan frames its purpose as both a security solution and a humanitarian reconstruction project. The first major operational step of the plan is the immediate end of the war. If both Israel and Hamas accept the proposal, all military actions would cease at once. Israeli forces would withdraw to a designated line inside Gaza, where they would pause to facilitate the release of hostages. During this period, aerial strikes, artillery fire, and ground offensives would halt entirely, and both sides would freeze their positions until conditions were met for a complete and staged withdrawal of Israeli troops. Central to the plan is the return of hostages within 72 hours of Israel's public acceptance of the agreement. Hamas would be required to release all Israeli hostages, those still alive, as well as the remains of those who have passed away. Once this process is completed, Israel would carry out a corresponding prisoner release of its own. This includes 250 Palestinians serving life sentences and 1,700 Gazans detained after October 7, 2023 attack, including all women and children held since then, for every Israeli whose remains are returned. Israel would release the remains of 15 Palestinians. This reciprocal exchange is intended to resolve one of the most painful elements of the conflict. Adding to a point was Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence and disarmament will receive amnesty. Those wishing to leave Gaza will be provided safe passage. Immediately upon acceptance of the plan, humanitarian aid which surged into Gaza, the volume and content of this aid would match and likely exceed the levels outlined in the January 19, 2025 humanitarian agreement. This means large-scale rehabilitation of water, electricity, and sewage systems, as well as support for hospitals, bakeries, and equipment needed to clear the rubbles and reopen roads, and entry and distribution would take place through the United Nations, the Red Crescent, and other independent international institutions. With neither Israel nor Hamas permitted to interfere, the plan also reopens the Rafah crossing in both directions using the January 2025 mechanism. Governance in Gaza would undergo a major transformation. The plan calls for the establishment of a temporary technocratic Palestinian committee to run the territory's day-to-day administration. This committee would be apolitical, made up of qualified Palestinian professionals and international experts. Oversight would come from a new international body called the Board of Peace, chaired by President Trump and including foreign leaders such as former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. The board would manage reconstruction funding and ensure high standards of governance until the Palestinian Authority completes its reform program and is capable of assuming full control. Economically, the plan envisions a complete rebuilding of Gaza through what it describes as a Trump-led development initiative. A panel of experts who helped design and construct modern cities across the Middle East would craft a comprehensive redevelopment strategy. Their goal is to integrate security, governance, and investment frameworks to create jobs, expand opportunities, and build a sustainable future for Gaza's economy. A special economic zone would also be established, offering preferential tariffs and access to participating countries in order to attract foreign capital. The plan stresses that no one will be forced to leave Gaza residents. Residents who wish to leave temporarily will be free to do so and equally free to return. The broader vision is to encourage people to remain and participate in building a new, stable, and prosperous Gaza. The plan also contains strict provisions regarding Hamas and other armed factions. They would be completely excluded from governance, directly or indirectly, and all military infrastructure, including tunnels and weapons factories, would be dismantled. Gaza would undergo a monitored process of demilitarization, supported by an internationally funded weapons buyback and reintegration program. Independent monitors would verify that all weapons are permanently placed beyond use. Regional partners would act as guarantors to ensure compliance and to confirm that Gaza no longer poses any threat. To support those changes, the United States would work with Arab and international allies to create a temporary international stabilization force, or ISF, which would deploy immediately inside of Gaza. This force would train and support vetted Palestinian police units and coordinate with Jordan, Egypt, who have significant counter-terrorism and policing experience. The ISF would work alongside Israel and Egypt to secure border areas, prevent weapons smuggling, and facilitate the safe and rapid movement of goods entering Gaza for reconstruction. A formal deconfliction mechanism would be established to coordinate security operations among all parties. The plan explicitly states that Israel will not occupy or annex Gaza as the ISF gradually establishes stability. The Israeli Defense Forces would withdraw in stages, guided by conditions related to demilitarization and verified security benchmarks. The IDF would eventually leave Gaza entirely, aside from a temporary perimeter presence designed to protect against any resurgence of armed groups. If Hamas fails to comply or delays its acceptance of the proposal, the plan would still move forward in the areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF, including the expanded humanitarian effort. In other words, progress would not be halted by Hamas's refusal. The plan also includes an interfaith dialogue initiative aimed at reshaping public narratives among Palestinians and Israelis, promoting values of tolerance, coexistence, and the tangible benefits that peace could bring to both populations. Finally, the document outlines a political horizon. As Gaza's redevelopment advances and the Palestinian Authority completes its reform program, conditions may emerge for a credible path forward towards Palestinian self-determination and statehood, a long-standing aspiration for many Palestinians. The United States commits to facilitating dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to redefine this political horizon and to build the foundations of a peaceful future for both people. Implementation of the peace plan began quickly but faced major complications. On October 13, 2025, Hamas released 20 living hostages to the Red Cross, many appearing injured and malnourished. Israel began releasing thousands of Palestinian detainees, though many returned showing signs of abuse, claims that Israel denies. The recovery and identification of deceased hostages progressed slowly and became a point of tension. Despite the ceasefire, violence persisted. Israeli airstrikes on November 22nd and 23rd killed dozens of Palestinians, with Israel claiming the strikes were triggered by a Hamas fighter attacking soldiers near the Yellow Line. The withdrawal boundary agreed in the truce. Hamas accused Israel of nearly 500 violations within the first 44 days, including airstrikes, incursions, and firing on civilians, according to Gaza's health ministry. At least 67 children were killed after the ceasefire began, prompting criticism from human rights groups. At the same time, Israel accused Hamas of conducting attacks across the Yellow Line and failing to disarm or relinquish control of Gaza, key requirements for the plan. These exchanges underscored the fragility of the ceasefire and the difficulty both sides face in meeting the agreement's terms. Humanitarian aid distribution also fell short. Although the agreement required immediate full-scale aid entry, Israel severely restricted supplies in the early weeks. Instead of the planned 600 trucks per day, fewer than 150 trucks entered Gaza initially. Under U.S. pressure, deliveries rose to about 800 daily by mid-November, but still failed to meet Gaza's needs. In response, the U.S. established a CENTCOM-led Civil-Military Coordination Center to manage aid flows and resolve operational disputes. Diplomatic efforts continued as the situation worsened. On November 23rd, a Hamas delegation traveled to Cairo to meet mediators from Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. to address alleged Israeli violation that threatened to derail the peace process. Meanwhile, tensions escalated further in Lebanon, where Israel continued airstrikes despite a separate 2024 ceasefire, causing hundreds of casualties, according to the Lebanese health ministry. International forces have begun deploying to Gaza to train the new Palestinian police and support demilitarization. The technocratic governing committee is being formed, and the Board of Peace is starting its oversight role. However, with both sides entrenched, humanitarian needs unmet, and violence continuing in Gaza and beyond, the peace plan's future remains uncertain. Reports from Gaza's government media office indicates that Israel has violated the United States brokered Gaza ceasefire at least 497 times in 44 days, resulting in the deaths of 342 Palestinian civilians, most of whom were children, women, and the elderly. The office strongly condemned what it described as systematic and serious breaches of the ceasefire and international humanitarian law. It stated that Israel bears full responsibility for the humanitarian and security consequences of these actions, which continue to undermine the terms of the October 10th agreement. Despite the ceasefire's mandate for unrestricted humanitarian access, Israel has persisted in heavily restricting aid and medical supplies entering Gaza. Israel has launched another wave of air attacks across the Gaza Strip, killing at least 24 Palestinians in what local authorities called yet another violation of the 6-week-old ceasefire. Israel has justified the strikes by claiming a Hamas fighter had attacked Israeli soldiers inside Gaza's Yellow Line zone, territory Israel continues to control under the deal. Israeli officials said they killed 5 senior Hamas fighters. In response, Hamas immediately rejected Israel's account, demanding evidence and accusing Israel of manufacturing pretexts to evade its obligations and return to large-scale military operations. Reports from the ground mention that the ceasefire exists largely in name only, despite the declared pause in fighting. Israel has carried out multiple airstrikes, leaving Palestinians feeling unsafe and skeptical about Israel's commitment to the agreement. Palestinian authorities report that families in northern Gaza are now besieged as Israeli forces push deeper into the enclave and in what they say is a violation of the boundary lines established in the ceasefire. Israel's expansion beyond the unmarked Yellow Line, which already allowed it to control more than half the coastal territory, has heightened fears of collapse of the truce. Meanwhile, Gaza's Forensic Evidence Department reports severe challenges in identifying the bodies of Palestinians returned by Israel as part of the agreement. Staff say many of the 330 returned bodies show signs of torture, mutilation, and execution, and that they urgently need laboratory equipment to conduct fingerprint and DNA analysis. So far, only 90 bodies have been identified. Authorities are calling on international organizations to provide resources to help complete the identification process and allow families to reclaim their relatives. The continuing violence in Lebanon comes amid a similar strained ceasefire in Gaza, where Israel has also carried out airstrikes despite an official truce. Both situations highlight the challenges of implementing ceasefires in the region. Agreements may be signed, but enforcement is fragile. Violations are frequent, and civilians bear the brunt of the escalating tensions. The latest strikes in Beirut, killing Hezbollah's top commander, underline how quickly a fragile peace plan can unravel and spill across borders, linking the unrest in Gaza with the renewed hostilities in Lebanon. Let's take a look into what's transpiring on the Lebanon front. Continue. Okay. The strike, which targeted an apartment building in the densely populated Hezbollah stronghold of Haret Reik, resulted in the death of Hezbollah's chief of staff, Haytham Ali Tabatabai, and 4 other individuals, while 28 others were wounded. This attack marks the first Israeli strike in Beirut's southern suburbs since June 2025, breaking a relative calm that had persisted since a ceasefire was agreed upon in November 2024. Israel's military justified the attack, stating that it had eliminated the terrorists Haytham Ali Tabatabai as part of its ongoing campaign to prevent Hezbollah from rearming. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that Israel would continue to take whatever necessary action to keep Hezbollah from rebuilding its military capabilities. Hezbollah quickly responded, describing the attack as crossing a new red line. This rhetoric suggests that the group may retaliate, heightening the risk of a broader escalation. The strike in Beirut has raised serious concerns about the stability of the ceasefire that had held for almost a year. Despite the ceasefire agreement, Israel has maintained a policy of striking southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, ostensibly to target Hezbollah's military infrastructure. Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun has repeatedly called for international intervention to stop Israel's airstrikes. Hezbollah, for its part, has not conducted any attacks on